Great David Katz working the defense side of the table now.
Great to be with you guys.
It's so great to have David. Wow. I mean, I'm going to throw it out there and then I'm going to stand back and you can explain it. But I feel as though there's been a lot of ding dong, the witch is dead on Donald Trump. And it does appear that he's been mortally wounded from a business standpoint in this liability case, and where he jacked up values and lowered values. And you can go through all of that if you'd like. And we talked about it a little bit. But the thing where I'm getting kind of conflicting crosswinds is to whether or not it's ding dong, the witch is dead, or no. His stuff will still exist. He'll still have a relationship to his properties and his business. It's just that it will be in some kind of receivership. Can you explain this to me, please?
Well, your well-known regular guest, David K. Johnston, wrote very colorfully on this subject. And I think his title was Corporate Death Penalty for Trump Organization, which may have been a little bit of wishful thinking, because I guess some of the other famous expressions are things like the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. And also the organization will be, to use another phrase, a dead organization walking. Because while the ruling was extremely significant, and it was really all that the New York Attorney General could have asked for, it was a summary judgment, which means that there won't even be a trial on whether Trump and his kids and some other named civil defendants did it. They did it, the judge found, without even the need for a trial. All that's left now, starting Monday, is a trial on how large the fine will be. And the New York Attorney General has asked for a fine of, I believe, $250 million. So the question mark is, what is the combination of this ruling, which basically takes away the business certificate from these many Trump organizations and the LLCs and some of the trusts and everything that are under them? And so think of it, you can conduct a business all by yourself, and then people can sue you and they can get personal damages against you. That's not what Trump and his organization wanted to do. They had their famous bankruptcies in the casinos in New Jersey, right, in Atlantic City, and they were corporate bankruptcies. People couldn't go after Trump personally at all unless there was a personal guarantee, and Trump always tried to avoid having a personal guarantee. So they ran these businesses in corporate form. And because they ran them in corporate form, Mark, they needed to have a business license from New York State. And they'd run them since the late 50s. The dad had run them in these corporate forms, especially the Trump organization. And so the penalty for doing two things, lying on your business forms and putting your business forms out there where people like lenders and so forth would rely on them. If you did those two things under New York law, you didn't even have to have what you normally have for a fraud conviction, which is that Trump or his kids personally knew they were willfully and knowingly violating the law. If the documents were materially false and if they were distributed out there for business, those two things alone under New York law meant that one of the remedies was that you could cancel these corporate certificates. Think of it as losing your driver's license. If you lose your driver's license, you may still own a fleet of trucks, right? But you can't drive any of them. So one idea of what the remedy is going to be, and we don't really know. The lawyers went into court for Trump yesterday, and they asked the judge, what exactly is the remedy? What did you do on Tuesday? Does this mean that Don Jr. can't sell his condo if he gets a good price? I mean, how far reaching is this? The judge said that will be determined. I haven't decided that yet. But it certainly means that for now, Trump can't sell anything. They can't suddenly sell it to Ivanka. Ivanka was dismissed as a civil defendant in the case. So they can't sell it to Ivanka. They can't sell it at a sweetheart price to one of their cronies. They can't have some phony transfer of it. It's at least locked in place. And it looks like there's going to be a receiver, kind of like in bankruptcy, and that receiver will make the ultimate decision. So let's assume somebody wants to buy the Trump International, not Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, but there's another beautiful hotel called the Trump International overlooking Central Park in New York City. Someone comes along and offers a great price for that. Trump and his organization can't sell it. They would have to go to the receiver and say, hey, we're offered $300 million. The thing's worth about 280. Let's take the 300. The receiver would say A or nay. Then they would say, hey, wait a second, that's $20 million profit for us. probably the receiver wouldn't give it to Trump and his organization because they have to hold on to things to pay this fine of potentially $250 million. Those things will unfold down the road, those details.
So, in that spirit of the last thing that you've just mentioned, which is that anything sold, those monies would have to be used to pay damages, et cetera. Would they be compelled, though, because of the size of the damages? I mean, she's talking about, I think, in New York, 250 million is the. I mean, again, this is why I'm so glad we're speaking to you. But that's certainly the figure I saw thrown around as the base. My question to you is: would they be forced to liquidate any of these properties to pay that bill?
In order to liquidate any properties, they'd have to get the approval of a receiver. One thing that the judge said is that they wanted names of potential receivers within 30 days. That's, again, like a bankruptcy trustee. That's somebody that the parties could agree on that they would trust to make these major decisions about what can be liquidated, what can be transferred where. But it shouldn't be underestimated. When Mr. Johnston says that it's a corporate death penalty, it shouldn't be underestimated how important it is, because apparently all of these famous properties are potentially under this umbrella where Trump and his kids and these other defendants would lose effective control of them. They'd have to go to the receiver to sell them, to pledge them, to do all sorts of things with them. That includes, as I say, Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. That includes 40 Wall Street. That includes Mar-a-Lago. If I can just make one personal note, I was a summer associate on Wall Street. Guess where the huge firm was, in what famous building? 40 Wall Street. And it was the summer of Alien. And so we all had T-shirts, we summer associates, that said, at 40 Wall, no one can hear you scream. Now it's not even 40 Wall. Now it's Trump Wall. Come on, come on, come on. But these are real elite properties. And as I say, even Mar-a-Lago could be covered by this. Now, but businesses can keep operating, right? And they can keep operating if the receiver says, I don't know, let's say Don Trump Jr. runs the golf courses. He can still run the golf courses. He can still sign up new members at Mar-a-Lago. They can hold events at Mar-a-Lago. They can bring money in. But you're right. They cannot take a lot of money out or liquidate anything without having the receiver approve of it. As you could imagine, Trump's lawyers say this is outrageous. Trump says, how can this be happening in America? They basically just nationalized my private company. But that's really not true. They chose to do business in New York. One mystery to me is that Trump didn't move this whole kit and caboodle down to Florida some way. And maybe he couldn't. Maybe the Attorney General, Mark, was smart enough to get a restraining order so that he couldn't move the assets or put the assets somewhere where they were beyond the reach of New York. I think that she was clever enough to get that kind of an order. The judge has also been very controversial. He seems like a very mainstream, very by the book judge. He went to Columbia, undergrad school that Obama, FDR went to. He went to NYU Law School. He trained to sort of be a judge. He was like, I was a law clerk for 14 months. No one really trained me to be a judge. That was something that a lot of top students do for 14 months, 18 months, 2 years, something like that. He was actually a clerk to a judge for like 11 years. And then after being a law clerk to a judge for 11 years, he went on to become a judge himself. With all of these great things about him and the good reviews that he's gotten for all of his work, when Trump saw which way the wind was blowing, and it was blowing hard against him and his lawyers from comments the judge made, he went and sued the judge. And apparently the appellate court's going to rule on that, Mark. They may be ruling on it today, but I don't think his suit against that judge is going to go anywhere. He also moved to recuse his judge in Washington, D.C. in federal court. He tried to get rid of his judge in New York City on the hush money to the porn star case. So this is standard operating procedure for Trump, but he really is in bad shape right now. This is not at all where he wants to be, and it includes both of his sons. None of the other criminal cases involve his sons, right, or anyone in his immediate family. Well, here it is, that they supposedly committed these same violations of the New York corporate laws. The sons did, as the dad did.
The business licenses being pulled, David, does that change certainly you talk about, well, things can still proceed as they would at these various properties and at the resort. Does the business, the business licenses have been pulled in New York. So that's an immediate thing, I think.
Well, that is an immediate thing, but what are the repercussions? Right now, it's not like Trump International near Central Park or Mar-a-Lago is on the selling block.
Okay.
So I think it's a practical matter. And they're also appealing this. If they won this appeal, I mean, it is a far-ranging order. This New York statute has been used, Mark, against ExxonMobil. That case actually didn't go well for the Attorney General and the predecessor. Remember, Cuomo was once the Attorney General of New York. He started that case against ExxonMobil when he was still the Attorney General. And then James inherited it. That case didn't go well. They also had a case against the UBS Bank. That case went very well, but UBS paid a huge amount of money and got the case behind it. You know, Trump, of course, never wanted to settle, never wanted to admit that he'd done anything wrong. He really went to the mat, and at least so far, he lost big time. This was all the order that the civilly prosecuting New York Attorney General could have asked for without a trial, and now all that's left is $250 million fine. Probably is going to be imposed. Now, let me just say one thing that I think is important. Trump has said, you know what? People didn't lose money. So I may have lied to them to get them to give me credit, but they ended up making money. And when you think about it, that is a specious argument, Mark, because if you and I get together and we claim that we're worth $100 million by filing phony financial papers that say, for instance, your studio or my office, your studio is worth $50 million and my law office is worth $50 million, and they aren't, the fact that someone lends us $100 million and instead of the market happening to go down, the market happens to go up, okay, we are still, that is not kosher. Right. So his argument keeps being the banks made money. The banks didn't lose money. In a normal fraud case, I ought to have that defense. And the judge keeps telling them under this New York statute, you do not have that defense. If you go tell a bank that your triplex in Trump Tower is 3 times as large as it is, you say it's worth $300 million and it's worth at most $100 million, and that no apartment in New York City has ever sold for $100 million, but you claim that you have one that's 3 times as large as it is, that will sell for 3 times more than there's any record that it would sell at, and you give that to banks, and banks then lend you $300 million against something which at most is worth $100 million. You have broken this law. And he says, well, nobody should have relied on it. I'm Trump. I'm a visionary. I have a vision that no one else has that vision, and it's an opinion. And when the judge slammed him on that, Mark, and said that is not an opinion. When you say the place is 3 times as large as it measures, that is not an opinion, that's fraud. And you gave it to banks and you gave it to insurance companies, and that's it. That's why there doesn't need to be a trial, because those 2 things alone are the 2 elements, and the pretrial litigation makes it clear that you have no defense to that. Your defense is it was your opinion. You and I have a house. It's 2,000 square feet. We say it's 7,000 square feet. We don't have a defense. There's nothing to try, if that's the element, if that's the issue.
David, based on that, and because it was a summary judgment, doesn't that sort of put the appeal in this category of, not really, likely to be defeated? Trump's appeal?
The appeal is likely to be defeated. At the same time, it's such a drastic remedy that it seems that it probably...
the penalty of $250 million plus, it could be more than that. You think that's a drastic, is that what you mean when you say drastic remedy?
Well, that he can't really direct any of these properties, that he has to have a receiver put in there. He may not like the receiver, and then the judge will impose a receiver. So if you step back from that and you think, wow, what is a court supposed to do with that? We haven't seen a case quite like this. We saw this statute used against ExxonMobil. It didn't really go anywhere. That's not much of a precedent. We saw it used against the bank, but let's say the bank is worth $60 billion. It paid $2 billion and settled. That's not really a precedent for what happened here. I mean, Trump has lost control over the whole empire based on this ruling. And if it keeps going that way, and it's 250 million, maybe it's 300 million that the judge finds is the appropriate fine. And so all of those assets are subject to paying to $300 million being paid. Now, if someone could turn around and sell everything for, let's say, $1 billion, and it was 300 million, then Trump and his family could take the $700 million. They might be sued other places for it. They're always being sued, and there's fines in all these criminal cases if they get convicted, if Trump gets convicted. But it is a drastic enough remedy. It's remarkable enough that I think that if I'm betting, the appellate courts are going to stay this, or they're going to modify this. I don't think Trump will get the control of the empire back again. But I think you won't be able to really notice very much the difference, because I think the reality is the 2 things that he would want to do is to really loot it, to really take money out of it. That he will not be able to do. But if he really has a good sales price to sell it, why wouldn't the receiver say, if the thing's worth $280 million, you can get $300 million? Sure, let's sell it. They might hold the $20 million in escrow and not give it to the Trumps.
But to be clear, doing that you just described, that scenario, that would be to pay his bills. That is to say, pay the $300 million or whatever it ends up being. Again, $250 million seems to be the seller. That is the CELLAR, the bottom. It could be way more than that. So if they did that thing that you just described, which is sell property, that would be used to pay that bill, to pay what's owed in liability.
A lot of people would do something like this. They would say, let's settle for $100 million. Let's settle this whole thing for $100 million. And then they would sell, let's say, 40 Wall Street, so they could put 40 Wall back on it and not Trump Wall. And I would be happy either with a picket sign out.
The shirt already.
Thank you for renaming it 40 Wall.
Yeah.
And then so they would sell it, let's say, Mark, for $200 million, right? They would take the $100 million and Trump would have all of this off his back, because it's kind of complicated. But at some point, if he could get enough control of the empire, I think, and if he paid the amount that was due. So let's say the empire is worth $1 billion and he ends up owing $100 million. He and his family would get the remaining $900 million.
Okay.
They couldn't maybe operate it in New York, but they could, let's say, sell it to themselves at a fair market price. They could sell it to Ivanka at a fair market price. And once the receiver approves that, because it's worth $1 billion and the fine is $100 million, they would walk away with $900 million in entities that they could control. Maybe they wouldn't be in New York State. Are you with me?
Yeah, totally with you, actually. So, I mean, again, this speaks to both what they could do and also the loss of the business license. So, as you say, they have to do it somewhere else. We got this super chat from Scott Rittenberg, who says, can you ask Mr. Katz, is Trump acting like a sovereign citizen? Sovereign citizens are those who the laws don't apply to them. They kind of choose what laws you'll explain it in a second, David, maybe. Trump acting like a sovereign citizen. He is the true victim of crimes he committed, paper terrorism, anti-constitutional law / pro-English law favoring white supremacy, colonialism. Wow. There's a lot there, Scott.
That's a pretty loaded question. Trump's father chose to do business in New York and to get New York business licenses. You know, a lot of corporations do business in Delaware. They're headquartered in Delaware. When Dominion, the voting machines, when Dominion went after Fox, lo and behold, they were both Delaware corporations. There's a reason why they were Delaware corporations. This precise thing, I think, couldn't happen to you if you were a Delaware corporation. But his dad decided to set up this New York entity. It's still a New York business entity. And now they're hoisted on the petard of being a New York entity. And these trusts are supposedly all under that. Now, the judge may release some of them. I mean, it may be that Don Jr. can sell a condo. It may be that they can do something else with one of these trusts. But at least the danger right now is that everything is covered by this order, that nothing can be sold or liquidated, and the Trumps can't profit from selling something. But they can very much manage it. The idea is not to destroy any of these businesses. The idea is that they do well enough to pay this fine and so forth. And as to the restitution that they may owe, if this is really true that the market happened to go up, you know, New York real estate happened to go up during this period of time. So if you lent against it, you built a tower because you thought Trump could pay you back because he was worth $2 billion and he was only worth $100 million or $200 million. You built a building, you put $2 billion into it because you thought Trump could pay you back $2 billion. Now it's worth $3 billion. There's no restitution. There's no fraud damages in the way that we normally think of them. At the same time, what Trump did, I mean, you have a corporate charter because you're supposed to be a law-abiding citizen. That is not being a law-abiding corporate citizen, right? To say that something is 3 times larger than it is. Another one of his stunts, like Mar-a-Lago down in Florida, he got a lot of tax benefits by agreeing that he wouldn't develop it. One of its best uses might be to tear the whole place down and to build condos all over the land. He's agreed that he won't have those kind of density issues. He won't build condos all over. So what does he do? He values it as though he could go build condos on it. As it sits there, it's worth, let's say, $100 million, but with condos all over it, sold for condos, it's worth $1 billion. So he says it's worth $1 billion and disregards the fact that he's made a binding agreement that he can't build condos on it. He values it as though he could build condos. He has rent-controlled properties or rent-stabilized properties in New York. He acts like he could get $10,000 a month rent for each one of them, right? And that's the value, whereas he could only get 2,000. It's just this raw kind, in my opinion, of fraud that the judge called out and that the attorney general called out. And you can ask yourself, this was the case that the DA was supposed to bring. Remember the two special counsel over at the DA's office, this one guy from a big firm who had a lot of experience bringing these kind of cases. And then when the old, the ex-DA Vance ended his term and the new DA came in, he didn't really like the case. He didn't go on the case. There was a very noisy departure of the two special counsel in the DA's office. One of them wrote a book. They didn't bring this criminal case, but this was the criminal case paired with the fact that when it came time to pay taxes, guess what? That's when Mar-a-Lago was all restricted, couldn't build anything, was hardly worth any money, so hard to get, people who wanted to come there and play golf, right? All of these buildings in New York City, they had rent regulations. Oh my God, they weren't worth anything when it came to the tax man, right?
Can you do this thing? Is this done often in business where you sort of self-assess? Because he did petition. I mean, part of what he did is he petitioned for a lowering of his value of the valuation or the assessment against some of these properties. I didn't realize that we could just all kind of do this thing where, as you say in your example, you look around your office and you go, you know what? I don't think it's worth as much as I thought it. I'm going to petition the tax man not to be paying the big property tax on it or whatever it might be. I didn't realize that was even something you could do.
Well, if you believe the allegations, and there are a lot of them, Trump really, was a browbeater. He was a bully. And he found places where these government agencies were vulnerable and where these lending institutions. One of the allegations is that the person at, I guess it was Deutsche Bank, who approved a lot of these loans, that he gave her this, rent-free, fantastic apartment in New York City. His CFO, the fellow who went to Rikers Island and didn't rat on him, even though he sat out at Rikers Island. Remember that? He had all of his tuition paid. He got all those perks, all this kind of stuff. So, the theory of Trump is that, it was almost like omerta, the people who say that he's like a mafia guy. He always had something on the person. That's what Michael Cohen says about him. He always had something on the person. So the person was going to snitch on him. Well, guess what? They knew something about the guy's wife. They knew something about the guy's kid. And, supposedly with the attorney general, a guy named Schneiderman or something like that, he apparently had something on him. And when everything blew up, somehow this Schneiderman got, they told Schneiderman's story to the newspapers and Schneiderman was suddenly out. So the people who think that, the racketeering, offenses apply to Trump, I've called already the racketeering case down in Georgia. I think it's a bit of a monster, especially as to some of the other ones who have to sit through and pay for a 5-month, 6-month trial and are small players in it. But Trump, bring it on. I think this case is absolutely righteous. I agree with the judge on it. And they did this over and over again. He played all of these games. I mean, you say, why doesn't the average person do this? The average person knows they're going to go to prison with all the friends they may have at a lending institution, with all the great lawyers. If I can toot my own horn, they can hire David Katz all day. They can hire 100 lawyer law firm, and they can put 3 or 4 former assistant U.S. attorneys like David Katz on the case. And guess what? They're going to go to prison. So they step back from doing this. The idea is that, let's face it. What are the allegations made against Trump? That he really is that sociopath who does something like Trump University. I mean, think of that, to do something like Trump University and then to insult the judge because of where he was born on that case. And then when he pays $25 million, everyone seems to sanitize it, Mark. I don't say everyone, but look at all the Republicans who are still standing behind him right now. Look at the fact that he's ahead for the Republican nomination right now. Look at the debate last night where nobody seemed to call him out. I mean, Christie did a little bit, but you and I could have called him out so much better on that stage. And it's like they just all seem to shrink from calling Trump out.
I think they're scared in many ways. He's got followers who do a lot of stuff, and that, to my last question to you, is the connection to what you talked about, which is he speaks about these judges. He's threatened these judges in the way a mobster would threaten them. Kind of like what is that? I wish it could be somebody rid me of that meddlesome priest or whatever. You know,
Right.
the essential out loud wish to erase these people, these judges, and. I'm wondering at what point. I mean, I know we're really in uncharted waters. Former president and a super rich guy being potentially smacked back by the law. But at what point does the law say, "Hey, you have a gag order. You have threatened these judges. This is done now. Now you're going to be under home confinement or whatever it may be, David." I mean, or is it just that we are in such uncharted water that they're just going to let this guy flex?
Well, he has this sense, right, of knowing where the line is. He's willing to step over the line a little bit, but he tries to do everything like Michael Cohen said in this kind of, you know what I mean, but I'm not really saying it out loud. And so he goes pretty far. The good news about the judges and the federal prosecutors and stuff like that, they have a lot of protection. They have security details. In many instances now, their family has security details. This is, I mean, absolutely the way that it should be. And at least I can speak to the federal judges. The federal judges have the marshal services. They have these buildings. I mean, they have tremendous security. I'm sure that they have people now driving them back and looking around, almost like the Secret Service does, for Secret Service protectees. So they have that. It wasn't always that way. I'll tell you, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, I had to go to the penitentiary, to high security part of the penitentiary, because there had been a crime there. And I said to my boss, well, before I go out there, I was like 29 years old, I never been to a prison, I said to my boss, any words of wisdom, before I go to this high security federal penitentiary. Cold as ice, he said to me, we don't negotiate for hostages.
Wow. Wow.
So that was sort of the attitude. I had someone threaten me when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. I said, is there someone around to start my car? And they were like, take the bus,
Wow.
So there was an attitude that, but of course, the criminals also had that attitude. The accused had that attitude that you were a piece of furniture. If anything happened to you, they just bring on somebody else who do exactly what you were doing. But they have certainly changed that attitude for Trump, and they are taking great precautions. And I think that's smart. Just remember this, they are in office. I mean, the reality is it's not Trump right now who controls the FBI, who controls the Department of Justice, who controls the U.S. Marshal Service. So they're taking great precautions. And if there's anyone out there who's one of those nutty people who sort of goes into something for Trump, they will be caught, they will be prosecuted, they will be imprisoned. They need to all, like, what did he say? Stand back. This is one of those where they need to stand by all the way back and not do anything like January 6th again, because there is, I mean, and rightfully so, Mark, I don't believe in the surveillance state. I'm basically a libertarian, but you cannot have your top judges and your top prosecutors and the people on Trump's case. You can't have them be intimidated. You just can't.
But to summarize what you've just said as to Trump's misbehavior and threats, he is acutely aware of where the line is, whether it's instinct or, a conscious focus. And it would be so it's incumbent again on those who feel threatened and are threatened to take precautions as opposed to a clap back at Trump and trying to, limit him in some way. He's received the gag order, but it is what it is. That's what I'm getting from you.
You take someone like Senator Menendez, right, in New Jersey. It would never be in his interest to attack the judge, even on a Twitter or something like that. Everybody realizes this judge has huge power over me. This doesn't make sense. Trump is in a completely different sphere. And if you're in that sphere, you probably do have a First Amendment right to say things like, I think that my special counsel, Jack Smith, is deranged. I think this judge is totally biased against me. I think all these people are part of the deep state. He has a right to say that. Most defendants will never say something like that, not only because it's not true, okay, but because they fear the consequences. I mean, a normal person for self-preservation thinks it is not wise to get everybody in the system who has all this power over my case infuriated with me. Now, Trump also likes to play that game where he baits them, right? He baits them enough, he throws up the red flag, and he hopes the bull will go in the wrong direction and it will play to his favor. He's a very, very unusual defendant. who's in the court of public opinion. He's willing to push it. He figures all of those judges at the end of the day are going to rule against him as much as they can, that the evidence is going to be overwhelming. And this is a fair-minded judge. He's not saying the judge is really biased against him. He's saying a fair-minded judge like this judge in D.C. Look at the evidence of these different conspiracies that he did. And, you don't have to convict him of everything, Mark. In these cases, it's enough. Nobody says, wow, I batted 500. I'm a great criminal defense attorney. They only convicted you of half the felonies you were charged with. You have to basically run the table when you're a criminal defense attorney and you go to trial. He knows that all the great lawyers in the world are not going to run the table. He's going to end up having rulings against him, the evidence against him. And so far it's worked for him, Mark, hasn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, I hate to say it,
right.
but so far it's worked for him. When this thing started, he was lower in the polls. Somehow he's managed to position himself where these people see him as a victim. I've never gotten it. I've never gotten it from the beginning. He goes up to Michigan. He's the friend of the working class. Are you kidding me? He went up there on the invitation of management to a non-union shop. To me, it's all so hollow. I don't know why the white working class goes for him, but
I mean, let me just respectfully suggest that it is charisma and a personal dynamic. I mean, it really is a cult of personality, and it's just that, personality. They pay absolutely no attention to policies that would hurt them, that were in place when he was president the last time and will be in place again should he become president again. I did like the fact that this is off the legal thing, but we mentioned a couple of times that the UAW president did call him out for being, a slave to his donors, to the billionaire. He's a servant, I think is the actual quote, to the billionaire class. So to that extent, but again, that in the news cycle will evaporate in less than 24 hours. And then he has that, it's wild. These are wild times, but the law is so much a part of it, David. I love your take on things, and thank you for making time for us every week. I really appreciate it.
Just on that political point, as I used to say to Pat all the time, vote, organize, beat Trump at the polls. That's the solution to all of this.
Bravo. David Katz, everybody. Thanks, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.